I did such a good job the first time. Oh my goodness gracious, Reed.
I know.
Now, oh goodness. Yes, my name is Eddie Amato. I am founder and chief architect of a company called Design Systems House for dedicated to the future of design systems. Very involved in the design system community, and Adobe Spectrum is one of my favorite design systems out there. I really enjoy a lot of the resources they provide there, and I'm interested in diving in to understand more about some of the decisions they made.
Love it. Thank you for joining. Guy, I'm passing the mic to you.
Thanks, Fareed. Hey, everyone. I'm Guy Segal. I am Director of Design at Thomson Reuters, and one of the areas I am responsible for is the design system, Saffron, at Thomson Reuters. Been here for over 3 years. Reed invited me here to give a design system leadership perspective, and the things that I'm probably going to look at and are going to be more interesting for me is what things can go wrong between the intentions of the design system team and then how it's implemented. I think for me, that's a fascinating thing.
Love it. Marta?
I can go nice. I'm based right now on Madrid. I have just joined recently months ago. Safe team, right? The cybersecurity company as a design system. I'm really happy to be here because as all of my partners just saying, Adobe was one of the first reference that I take it for inspiration. And a lot of people in the teams or in the small companies, we just take it like the big companies as a big reference. And we didn't think like how much bigger is the company, how much more inconsistent is the product. So sometimes we just try to like documentation and components. And then we see sometimes it's not fitting on what we have on the system. So I'm really happy to just go and explore what it's inside of Adobe.
And we have engineering perspective here. Francis, would you like to introduce yourself?
My name is Francis. I've been working in the design system industry for the last 5 years, focusing on being the bridge between design and engineer. So yeah, I've been using React as a big reference. I try to bring my engineer perspective.
Thank you. My name is Fareed. I'm hosting today's session, so thank you for joining. We added the links to LinkedIn profiles. If you would like to take a look and follow our speakers, please do that. What's the goal of our session? It's called Inspect and Reflect. This is how we could take a look into how design systems are actually being used within the product. So we could inspect and reflect. We want to emphasize that this session is not intended as a critique of Adobe's work. We know that there's so many challenges involved, but this is more like an educational part. And if you would like to join our upcoming sessions, we have those Inspect and Reflect sessions every 2 weeks. The upcoming one will be around our design system. Feel free to join and participate with us next time. Let's get started with alert banners. So we'll just go into our private speakers only feature board, and I'll just paste it into our feature board. We did some tagging in advance, but if you see anything similar to alert banners, please just put the screenshot on the side so we could talk about it. So alert banners. So on the left side, you will be able to see the documentation from the design system. And on the right side, we will be taking screenshots and adding some notes around the ways how this alert banner is actually being used within the product. Alert banners show pressing and high signal messages such as system alerts. They're meant to be noticed and prompt users. So here's the link to the main Spectrum design system documentation. Here are the different variations and anatomies. We could see that there might be an icon, text, some button on the right side with the close option. There are different variations of that where we have text, semantic variants, and it could be actionable and could be dismissible. So we went through the Adobe website, and there are a couple places where similar alert banners are actively being used right now. So the first one is the Infa alert banner on apps page and also on the main website, right? And as we can see, looks like it's very consistent with the design system. I guess this is coming from the actual design system. This is actual design system component where we have icon on the left side, we have some message and some actions on the right side. So I feel like this is the good example how the design system components are actually being used within the product. Look into the code. Francis, would you like to start and just take a look into the code and share your feedback on, is it actually coming from the design system? Maybe some thoughts around the area labels and how you could think about the accessibility part of this component?
Yeah, it's always hard to figure out if it's actually coming from the design system because it could be like someone copy paste the code and trying to replicate that. So without more context, it's harder to tell. But right on the dot, you have a row of alert, you have your label on the icon, stuff like that. Otherwise, there's little thing I noticed. If you look at the documentation for the banner, the button should always have an outline, and looks like they're all like ghost button, I will call them. So that's an interesting thing. Is it the new way they're moving forward in the documentation is not updated? Oh yeah, the class is cool, it's coming from Spectrum, but I would guess that you never know.
Love it. And speaking about the class naming conventions, this is a good opportunity. I've seen the same pattern used within IBM Carbon Design System, where they are adding their own design system specific label, like class parameters with some styles for sure inside, but it will be like you will able to 100%, not the 100%, but at least understand that it's coming from the design system based on the naming conventions. So you could also add abbreviation of your design system, like Spectrum Design System, SDS, and then the name of the component. So next time when you are searching for your component usage within the product itself, you can actually take a look into that and see that it's coming from the design system. Coming from an engineering background, do you have any thoughts about how to add additional parameters into the code so that we could be sure that it's coming from the design system? Maybe some additional parameters that you might think of?
Well, actually, you will never really know because you can just like have the same parameters, but doing it. But as for the naming convention, usually it's done because you want to avoid clashing with other code from other people. If you name your component toast and there's another component coming from another design system or just a toast, it could clash visually as the CSS will apply to both. So that's a way to make sure that you're scoping your CSS to avoid any styling collisions with. So yeah, but usually that's a great way to tell if you see a class of Spectrum or Nord or whatever the name of your design system. That's pretty much sure. If you're using React, you could use the React dev tools to validate that it's the right component. That's a way to view the components that are being used. But
Donnie?
Yeah, I'm actually learning
you,
something
Francis.
here in the code because I actually have never seen the focusable attribute before on an element, and I see that's attached to the SVG. Because I think in my approach here, I probably would have considered the SVG icon, which is probably the information thing that's in there. I would have considered that an accessory, basically like a visual one. I'm not sure necessarily that it's helpful to announce it to the user that this is in an information context. From an accessibility standpoint, when I'm thinking about technology that's doing a screen reader, I usually want to reduce the amount of noise that the component could produce, such that it's easier for that person to grab that. I think I would be interested to know why Spectrum chose to label the icon as such from, the label and the role image and things like that, because typically I would put a role presentation on there to hide it from the tree.
Love it. We'll go there deeper.
That might be linked to the fact that you can have a danger alert. So in that sense, you might need to be aware that what you're going to do is an error. So I guess if you want consistency, you should also let people know that this is an information alert versus something that is you need to take action about, like maybe your session is expired or whatever. So that might be the reason.
I have a question. I'm wondering something, and I'd love to hear what Francis and Donnie's thoughts are on this. We have the alert component, and there's also a toast component, right? And in documentation, they're saying use alert for this kind of thing and use toast for these other things that are less urgent. They're not something that comes from a system message. In the code, we can see that they're using toast, even though it's an alert. I would assume because they look stylistically very similar, even identical. But I'm wondering about any shortcut to style both the same way. I'd love to hear your thoughts about this thing clashes where you have an implementation visually, but you want to differentiate from a semantic. Is this something that is throwing a red flag for you? Because yes, they look the same, but semantically they provide different uses.
I guess I can go for that one. Yeah, I think it's really interesting that the in there says toast, and admittedly, a user wouldn't see that, right? They don't necessarily care, right? So from what you're speaking about there is from a person who's grabbing design system resources, how do they grab it and use it in context, right? Because I think we would understand that this group of components, this family of feedback components, they're all really similar. And that's one of the reasons why I think it's a really interesting family to talk about, because you could technically put this lockup, this treatment inside of the page as a banner. You could put it as a pop-up of a toast. You could even, in some cases down the line here is the coach mark. It's a more vertical kind of layout, but it's the same kind of content. So all of that stuff is providing similar information, just in a different context, whether it be like the entire website's context when it's like a toast, or in page, or even if it's disruptive, like a modal kind of thing. It's interesting in terms of the amount of compositional changes that we might want that relate to the intention of the message, right? So the fact that this thing is composed as a toast is not as important. How it's supposed to be related to the overall experience of the page, because like you said, the toast as the alert, it's the same thing. I'm even arguing that these things could technically be the same thing if you wanted to maintain it that way. But I think there's maybe some aliasing happening where a person is thinking that they want an alert, and they don't necessarily care that it actually happens to be the toast implementation under the hood. So I have a couple of examples in my own systems that do this aliasing. And I think it's really helpful, going back to icons, when someone is thinking, I need the close icon, but that icon in the system is maybe marked as X. If you don't have that aliasing involved where you can match that up, sometimes you'll be missing, like, where is this thing that I need? When, if that alias doesn't exist, it's hard. But if you have that aliasing where toast is the same thing as an alert, even though it's a different name and use case, it could be helpful to pick that up easily.
So within the large organizations, right, when we see that within the spectrum, they have a global design system, and then they have framework specific, right? It's Spectrum React or Spectrum Web Components or Spectrum CSS, right? And I feel like maybe I made a mistake here by typing the wrong thing because it's a toast component instead of the alert banner. I'll need to double check if in the main design system they actually have a section for the toast components or not, right? Mm-hmm. But like, how would you solve that within large organizations? We see that there are opportunities. It's very complex one. So from like large organizations, how to resolve that?
Are you resolving the difference in naming? This is the question.
First of all, within the global design system, we have one component called alert banners. And then when we're taking into the look, looks like it's a toast component, named as a toast component. Maybe it's coming from framework specific. Maybe in React, they named it differently. And maybe the question here is how to manage this global design system and smaller design systems, how to make collaboration better. Do you have some kind of ceremonies to go through, or maybe more advanced like code review or design critique sessions that helps to connect these two worlds together?
This is the $1 million question, because a design system team or practitioners will build something with a certain intention of how it's going to be used. Now, the question is, do other people know or understand the rationale, understand what they're trying to achieve? This might be a controversial perspective, but for me, a design system is not the components or the patterns or any of the assets that come with it. It's foremost the intentions. If I don't give you anything, can I still give you the tools for you to build a product the same way that I intended you to? That is the root of the system. And communicating those intentions, that's the hardest part, because it's really hard to control what the consumer of the design system is going to do, what they're going to look at, whether they even care about your documentation. One of the exercises I did as I was looking through this documentation is just look at, if I don't read even one word, Do I just scan the page and see the pictures of do's and don'ts? Do I understand how to use it? Am I going to hit the same intentions that they did? And if not, what can I do in my own design system to change that? What can I learn from that? There's always, we have meetings where we bring representatives from the product design teams and talk about their needs and what we provide and how to use it properly. We have training sessions. Nothing guarantees you that kind of understanding by the consumers of how to use it. There's another component here, which is the tag component. Everyone has seen how tags and badges and those kind of components are interchangeable, right? In how people use it. I don't know if it's always a bad thing. I think sometimes it's a symbiotic relationship, right? We want our consumers to use it in a certain way, but do we also need to learn from our consumers how they're using it and grow our design system to match that?
There's a question from Peter. With intentions, do you mean behaviors that you want designers and developers to exhibit, or intentions for the product?
I would say both. I would say when we set up a design system, usually we say, okay, use this component for this kind of behavior, interaction, communication. But it's also change management. We want to change the way our consumers, the people who are using the design system, think about using it and think about, okay, I'm going to build this kind of interaction. I want my users to think and know what are the best tools to do it.
Love it. Marta, you have a thought?
Yeah, it's always talking about that one for naming and structure. There are like 4 components. So I'll just say we have the banner, the dialogue, the toast, and then of the product. We can create some glossary or something. I always go or try to go on that approach, because instead if you didn't have any components, you will always have the feedback status on components. In Adobe, there are, for example, error, negative, and destructive to just remain on the same thing. They're using notice and warning. They are default to remain in the same status. So just choosing one name and scale that naming to other component that transmit exactly the same can be useful. Trying to create a glossary for properties, the designers and engineers can be like a starting point. Because right now, if you just look to the toast or the banner, sometimes these status that are exactly the same are named differently. So that will be something that we can start, for example.
Marta, I want to challenge that actually a little bit, because I think there's something about the going into a new project and the amount of time it takes to start yourself up and to learn all the new terminology. Imagine if you were able to walk into a place and immediately know terminology. It's always so difficult. Just think about walking into a place and having to learn abbreviations, which are always the bane of people's existence. From my last company, if I just type in the word Fred, and obviously this is a little bit far-fetched, but if I was able to type in the word Fred and immediately the carousel pops up, like what I thought was Fred is actually a carousel. Similarly, in this kind of example here, like toast, I would just say is an alert that pops up. Or we have, in this design system I have working on called growl, which I've also never really heard very often, but it's a similar kind of behavior of the toast. So if there was not necessarily the glossary, but again, going back to that alias idea of being able to type in something that I'm familiar with, alert and toast and growl and even modal and dialogue being in there to at least give the person the idea of, okay, the general gist of the idea of that of the thing I'm thinking about, lead me in the right direction of what this thing is. And a little bit to that too, because it's entirely possible that there's some bias in that, and that happens all the time, where you have a component that's in your mind that you want to use for this particular experience that could be at the best component to use. My perfect example of that is some of the older folks in the call will probably like this, birthday input, right? Designers who are unfamiliar with some of the UX thinking behind that, and they'll put in a date picker for birthday. And old folks like me doing the Price is Right scroll to find the year in that thing and taking too long, or even worse, tapping the back button to get back to months. What we recognize is that a better component in those experiences would just be a regular text input to just put in your birthday, right? Very quickly, very easy. You know what your birth date is. But if you have that bias about this is the component that I want, it makes it potentially detrimental if you have that bias that says, I'm not going to look at any of the particular patterns on here because I know that this one for this thing. I would like to see a lot more documentation, either through naming or even patterns.
Make it help. So before I make it, at the end of every component, they just define it like the difference between components that look exactly the same. If they have a chip or a byte or a tag, whatever we wanted to name it, they just put these are the related components. So that's super, super useful. I try to make the same on our documentation just to put at the end. There is something that is similar to the other one. And if you're searching another function, that's how it's related. And this is supporting a lot too. But
Agree with that.
naming is challenging.
Love it. And is there a way to use AI for generating naming conventions for improving search experience? Alert, banner, help me to find all the different names that people might use in order to search for it.
I think I would go one step further in that because, again, going back to that bias, I would rather have a designer type in, hey, I need to let the user know at, I'll say, page level that we were not able to update the database. And instead of them having the bias of saying, oh, I know exactly what component that is, now the AI would suggest, based on previous patterns, pattern to use in that particular case. Granted, that's taking a little bit away of the decision-making process that a designer normally has, but it's identifying that there is bias in this stuff. We see this all the time about designers choosing patterns that are suboptimal, and that's from potentially lack of experience or the amount of stress that they're having for other projects. And there's lots of different possibilities there. But to offload that decision-making of what potentially is the best pattern to a system that has seen all patterns, and I'm putting that in quotes, it's going to be a lot more, I think, beneficial because they've seen it all and can suggest, so the designer can make a decision past that. I think instead of the just show me things that are like alert, show me the pattern that would be best in the situation.
Love it. Great. So a quick recap. We started with going through the alert banners and we found some interesting similar components, maybe related components. And we started talking about how to improve the naming conventions, right? I really like the idea that Marta shared, how Shopify is helping people to just show that there are related components. And here's the way how you can make your decision better, like with some decision trees or just a text. I love the idea, Donnie, that you shared that with AI, by knowing the context, having a context of all the documentation, might suggest better patterns in specific, and maybe also facilitate the decision-making process, right? So instead of having decision tree, what if AI could help people to do that? Francis, thank you very much for sharing V3 documentation. We also spoke about that last time, where should be the foundation, right, Francis, for naming conventions. That's the starting point. Great. Let's go through some of the questions and notes here. Classic design system design pattern collections used to have see also section pointing to related but not the same patterns. Of course, that field is missing from this definition of interaction design pattern collections. Love it. I never saw this. I never checked this website. That's interesting. Thank you. Other comments here. Naming conventions across platforms can be really challenging. Web, desktop, iOS, and Android can have some pretty divergent semantics, and you can't always neatly separate one from other. For instance, for many mobile apps type in web content that might be shared across other surfaces, menu, drop-down input, etc. Love it. Thank you, Sean, for sharing. Alex, if designers don't do it and your devs aren't doing it, who is going to do it? Accessibility isn't role-based. It's everyone's job. If you have devs that are accessibility experts, you have to do much less to ensure accessible designs. Either way, web standards and online documentation makes it clear to anyone wanting to learn or at least convey info to their developers. It really needs to be everyone's job to ensure accessibility, but everyone's job looks different, so there is no clear answer to me here. Thank you very much for sharing. Donnie, you have some thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, thinking about that first comment about the use also sections, because I'm reminded that Adobe Spectrum has one of my favorite parts of documentation. At the bottom of many of their components, you can go to like button, for example. In this one, let me see. You can go all the way down.
In all of them.
Yeah, there it is.
Yeah.
Your checklist is really cool. And I really like this idea because it is very transparent about the capabilities and what this component can offer or support. is an example. Maybe a component doesn't support right to left, but it needs to. And so they don't have a check mark there, but they're still calling it out, saying, hey, we have some work to do in this area, check back later or something of that nature. So showing in your documentation the kind of level of support that any one of these components is very transparently, I think is super helpful. You'll have people from your team that are like, hey, does this component have an iOS version? Does it do a theming well? Is it prepared for that kind of stuff? To have a checklist that says, okay, here's everything that we want to be able to offer, and here's the stuff that we're actually doing in this particular component right now. It's almost like a task board, right? Anybody can come into this thing and say, hey, what is this thing missing? Maybe I could help contribute. That's really cool.
Love it. Guy, how hard it is to implement, like to enable, do you have some similar practices?
We've done some aspects of this. We have a definition of done for our components, for everything we release. Some of these have to, just by existing in the design system, there's a check mark there. In terms of accessibility, everything has to pass these accessibility tests and some other things. A really great indicator here is there's a lot of things here that I would love to adopt to our own design system. Yes, this is a done component. But here are some other things that we need to add to it. You can start using it. It's stable. It's good. But here are additional things that might be coming later. Maybe there's code samples, for example, that we want to add to make it easier. Maybe there are other features we're thinking. So maybe second tier of parameters we want to add to it. I think that's I love how Donnie used the word transparent. I think that's the perfect description here.
And the other thing I want to add to this too is the idea of, we think about testing coverage in development, where you have full test coverage of a particular component. I see this as the possibility of documentation coverage, right? Where we're actually covering all the potential states and things people want to know. Have we actually covered all those things? I'm seeing this as the precipice, documentation coverage. So often we have people from our support channels that are like, hey, does this component do this? And we look at our documentation and go, oh, we missed that. So to have something that would actually cover that somehow, I think would be really helpful.
Love it. This is really good insights. Great. Yeah, Francis?
Yeah, just one thing I think beneficial for that checklist will be to know if something is planned or it's not supported, that it will never be for some reasons. So maybe an outline, like a circle in an outline saying like we're planning to release that, or it's unsupported because reasons.
There are other design systems that support this health component. And as you mentioned, they have the things that is going to be like sooner. So that would be nice to have this kind of table checklist.
Love it. Love it. Marta, and do you know any practices how to do that within Figma design library? Do you use component documentation, or you have something on the side where you have some kind of checklist, or maybe you thought about it in the future?
Yeah, I make it like the same like guy. When I just create like the component, I have a checklist. So sometimes it's super automatic, checking like the color contrast, just checking the size, just checking that everything have the properly tokens applied. And the part of that checklist, depending on every component, there are like a specification. For example, for the switch, you need to have depending which color contrast different for other components, or for the input. The label couldn't be the placeholder because it's not a good practice. I have this kind of checklist. I use a plugin. I don't remember the name because I just have it placed on one page, and I literally just copy and put it near the component and just fulfill all that checklist. But then after that one, I just going on the website of accessibility and just check if I need to have something more about of the basics, because there are things that maybe I didn't notice that this need to be implemented for code size, or things that are only specific for that component that I can just forget it. So normally I just fulfill the basics and then I just go to the website and just check it if there's something missing there.
Love it. Great. I feel like we covered most of the things related to Alert Banner. There are a couple other things. This is another one. When you are going into account adobe.com and updating your email communications preferences, this is the specification that you are seeing. Taking a look into the code, it looks visually that it might be coming from from Spectrum design system, but from the code, maybe it was overly formatted, or maybe they just tried to replicate it, or at least use design tokens. If you take a look into the code here, yes, looks like they are using the Spectrum tokens, right, Francis? So maybe
Yes,
this is like a part of the web components, not the React one, right? Or
that might be, there might be also transpilation. I don't know exactly their use case, but they might have some taking the React component or another and generating something that works. Yeah, that's more generic, I would say, for other words for now. But they for sure are using the tokens, which is a good thing.
love it.
What I'm seeing in that shot is, well, the first thing I see is the Pandora React alert banner. Now, Pandora is not a word that I'm familiar with in the Spectrum ecosystem. I'm going to want to assume a little bit that may be another component library. And what they're doing here is potentially making it look like Spectrum by providing all these design tokens to these properties such that it looks like it's part of the system. And I'm only getting from that test ID, and which is really interesting to me as well, because I wouldn't recommend adding test IDs into production. Right, like that's another like odd choice in there. Maybe, and then this could be like a fluke in the whole system there. But one of the things that I always recommend is you can add test IDs as hooks or selectors to start identifying things to assert the testing in that way. But it's odd for that to be in production because you want to reduce the amount of bytes. And granted, like these are a very small amount of bytes, but it certainly can add up the amount of test IDs and hooks that you're potentially adding in production. And in places that I work, I always recommend to hide that behind a flag such that they're all removed in production. In this case, that it's identifying a little bit and pulling back the curtain about what this potentially could be, about this idea of potentially using another component that's out there and just styling it like Spectrum.
Love it. And there's a comment in the chat from Florin. Florin, thank you very much for sharing so many insights in the chat. A good example of a redundant status announcement. Since the message says successfully, having an alternative text for the icon severity will be redundant and might be conveyed as noisy. That's a good one. Find. Yes. Okay, great. There is one that I wanted to discuss. Let's dive deeper into the next one. Let me pull the alert dialogues. Maybe it would be better if we could spend some time on search components. So let me add things that we've tagged before, and also feel free to take a look into the Infa community board. Everything that we've tagged is available there. So you can see where it's being tagged within the products with the right links. Let me pull the search field components right here, and we could discuss that. There are so many search fields within the different products, right? And this is because this is one of the main use cases within the user experience that people will like to do some actions like search within the page or search across all the pages or global search. Let's take a look into the computation first. Search field. A search field is used for searching and filtering items. Right? It's the link. Here's how it looks. So there is a search icon, search label, placeholder, and also ability to clear the search field. The options are the having label and icon, value, the width, the sizes, having a quiet version of this component, and having a disabled version of this component. In some cases, I tagged search fields within landing pages that are not meant for the design system, but it's an interesting thing to discuss. Marta, would you like to start and share your first impressions? Do you feel like some of the components that we see here are actually applicable for the design system, or some of the things are coming from the marketing department, right, as a part of like landing or other things? So would you like to start?
I will not go deeper on token side because sometimes the colors are a little bit changing. For general, the structure always like placing like the icon on the left, that having a placeholder, it's always like the same structure. So that's fine because sometimes you can see like other products where the search it's always on the right and on the left, and it's not clear where to place them. like 99% of them are placed properly and have a placeholders changing like the borders because they have this kind of theme where it's rounded depending of if it's one product or the other one. So it's consistently in comparing other stuff. I would say the same. I'm not going deeper on tokens because sometimes you can see the spacing is not always the same, but it's kind of clear when to use when and when to use the other one. And if you go on to documentation, everything it's really well structured. It's not like super complicated. If they need more props or more stuff, it's only an icon and a placeholder. And they have this quiet version just mostly use it like from Adobe Photoshop or something like this, that they have this background white, or they have in images they just use it the icon and only like one line. But most of them are structured on the component in comparison with other ones. That's nice.
Yeah. So I'm just trying to find some components that are closely related to the design system one, right? So here is two of them. The first one is available within the adobe.com for searching all the products. And then there is another search bar available within the account.adobe.com where you can filter by title or description. So let's take a look into the components, and I will try to see, first of all, like we can do like the visual inspection, and then we could dive deeper into code. Marta, do you see anything different here from like these two variations? Let me just scale up the size.
It's kind of a little bit similar here. They have more information. Here have it like the focus label. It have the same. And I'm sure they have like the label that the other one don't have it. They have usually the placeholder inside that is acting as a label. But here they have the label up of that one. And that was another thing that we have it always regarding accessibility, like how they tag the area label over they tag it using folder that here on the left I couldn't see it, or they are yet in a different way. That's important for accessibility. But I could here on the left.
Love it, love it. And yes, Donnie.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that actually there is a significant difference, but you can't tell from visually here. It's actually what's probably meant to be on the page for both of those things. Left-hand side might be empty if we're going to be searching for something. We have nothing. It's like an open field, open green space. We have no idea. And we're going to type in something. We're hopefully going to get a whole bunch of results, and hopefully they're relevant. On the right-hand side, where we're talking about filtering, we're potentially assuming the idea that there's a whole bunch of results already, and we want to reduce the amount of results that we have. So I think that's the difference between those two kind of expectations. Also, just in general, about how you would potentially pick one of those two things. I think that might be a little bit misleading, is suggesting that you're searching. And granted, from a very high level, you are technically trying to search, you're trying to find something. But in the one case, you're starting from scratch. And then the second thing on the right is you're starting from these things that are probably yours, and you want to find one in particular by reducing the noise that you have there by filtering. I will say that trying to figure out what a good filter icon is very hard. So I would assume that just using a search icon in there to get the indication of what to do is probably a little bit easier.
Love it. And I know that we're out of time, but one last question. Francis, you used the React area from Adobe, right?
Yes.
Do you know what is happening here? Is this like auto-generated?
From the look of it, I will say that it's probably doing some things like adding, from what I'm thinking is they're using React Spectrum, but they want to make sure they might have many versions in the same application. So they're trying to make sure that nothing is clashing and they're using the right thing. As for the ID, I have no real idea. I will need to see more like the bigger picture, but looks like some trickery going on to make sure that they can use many versions of React area or React Spectrum together on the same page, so they can have mismatch of styles here and there.
Yeah, it's just making things unique is basically the bottom line.
Exactly.
Love it. Great. So thank you very much for joining our session. Let me add more components that we've tagged. We always have more things to share than we have time, but let me just leave it right here. So if people would like to dive deeper and take a look into other things, the ways how we tag or site navigations, everything is available right here. And the recording will be shared in a couple of days. So thank you very much for joining. Thank you, Guy, Marta, Francis, Donnie, for participating as a speaker and sharing your thoughts and insights with the community. And thank you everyone who shared a lot of resources in the chat. I'll just need to spend some time there to read and check all the links. They are great. So thank you. Thank you.
Thank you too.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.